Hello and welcome to Talking Politics. Today we'll be talking about the role of media in politics, the Iran nuclear deal. Is it really the right deal? And migrants flooding into Europe. I have here with me today a political analyst, and she's a political activist as well, Rowena Cross. Rowena, you're very welcome to our studios.
Thank you for having me.
And also Brian Potman, who is our political correspondent. Brian, you're very welcome to our studios.
It's good to be here.
Let's start with Rowena. Now, Rowena, you are so much about the role that media plays in politics. Now, what role does the media play in politics?
Well, I think it plays a massive role in politics because when I was doing a course recently, we were asked to look at where did we think the person fell in a chart. So were they really, really bad or really, really good? And actually the point is, as a general public member, you have no idea because you only know what the media has portrayed to you. Definitely. So actually, the reality of what that person is doing, where their beliefs are, you may never know. You may never know how hard they're working or what they happen to be doing. So the media actually plays a massive part in political life because it's actually steering what a lot of people, where they get where they consume their media from. They're looking at the media and they're looking to the media to give them information, but actually that information isn't always the reality of what's actually happening. So I think the media play a much bigger part than they should in political life.
What do you think, Brian? Let's look at what happened recently about Lord Sewel. It was all over the papers what he has done. Now, the media portraying that, does that give the impression that that's how everybody in politics is?
British newspapers, best at stereotyping in the world, Wilma. I'd say go back to what Rowena said. It's about Lord Sewel was a very bad example that they spread across the media, so people reading it will think that's what they're all like. And if we get our news by proxy, and we can't be everywhere the news is going on, so we have to rely on someone reporting the news to us. We also therefore have to rely on those reports being factually correct. And we can't know that. We have like our authoritative news sources, like broadsheets, newspapers, so on and so forth. But then we have papers like The Sun, which cannot necessarily be quite so accurate, The Star, and the tabloids, which millions and millions of people read in this country every day. And if they're using their main news sources, how correct the stereotypes that they're putting across will be to the general public is dubious.
Rowena, back to you. How does the role that media plays in politics, how does it affect the real business of politics?
Well, I think that's a really interesting point because The Sun is Britain's biggest read newspaper. So whether you like it or not, it's one of the most influential newspapers that there are. That fact in itself to a Christian person can be quite terrifying because of the kind of stories that they choose to print. And exactly what you were saying, Brian, is that you're reliant on the journalist and the editor and their bias and their worldview, if you like. As a Christian, your worldview is going to be slightly different. And so I think it affects the business of politics by actually changing the landscape. And so what we need is more Christian people in politics and in the media probably, so that actually the reality of what's happening is being portrayed to the public, and actually those kingdom values that we three value will actually be brought into the heart of government and in fact into the heart of the media as well.
In other words, values like integrity, sincerity, these are the values we need in politics, and these are the values that Christians possess. Let's look at the last elections and what happened. All over the media, everyone thought it should be a hung parliament, but the Conservatives had a clear majority. What do you think about that?
I think, well, actually, I was doing a course with Christians in politics. Well, it was actually with the CCF, and there were more Christians that got in, which nobody reported on, in the Conservative Party than ever before. And somebody actually predicted that what was going to happen. They'd been praying about it and they predicted what was going to happen actually did happen. So what the media was saying, it was almost like they were trying to drive us to I don't know what the agenda was, but why were they trying to drive, what was their agenda and what were they trying to drive it towards? When actually, if Christian people just show up and vote and get involved, that's when things can be changed. You know, different outcomes can that you never would have thought would happen, like what happened in this election, can actually happen.
So it's all about the people that have the right qualities showing up and voting and being actively involved.
It's in democracy, the people that vote get someone in power. And it's interesting what Rowena said. It's going back to George Orwell, Animal Farm. Some people, we're all equal, but some are more equal than others. And with the new Equality Act that is now in the statute book, when you have to treat everyone equally, that means you have to treat every other religion equally, but not the religion that this country is founded upon. It's almost talking about Christianity is dismissed. We'd rather talk about Islam in the public sphere and so on and so forth. We'd rather concentrate about getting Muslims into Parliament. That's more important than getting Christians into Parliament. And there's
Why is that so?
Column inches in papers. I think that's what's reported on, because based on all the conflict that there's been in the Middle and Far East, the Muslim religion has come to the forefront of the press reporting, because the Christians haven't been quite so
vocal.
We don't do the Crusades anymore, I was going to say, in terms of conflicts and so on and so forth. So there's nothing to report that has some an impact value that conflicts in the Middle East and the atrocities committed by ISIL and so on and so forth has. That gets scholarship, that gets column inches, that catches people's eye. There aren't people reporting on any stories like that, because the Christians that have fled from Syria and Iraq, the Coptic Christians in Egypt, we hear very little about that compared to the Muslims in those areas.
Which means what the tabloids are looking at are the conflicts, really.
Yes.
That's what they're really reporting on.
Not the positive aspects.
Not the positive aspect. Rowena, what opportunities are there for Christians who want to become part of the political world?
Well, there's loads of opportunities, because actually, if you look at the Bible, God called the most unlikely people into the most unlikely positions. And if you told me a year ago I'd be sat here talking to you about politics, I'd have laughed in your face. And I think that the more ordinary people get involved who are Christians, then the more you can change really big decisions at the source of decisions. So you imagine, at our church, we have a food bank, and we have, we're looking at a job club, and we're trying to reach the needs and meet the needs of our community and walk alongside people and help them to move forward in their lives. But that's one community. If you take yourself into government as a Christian, you can actually have a louder voice. You can have a voice, and even if you're not the majority of voice, you can make the other people, you can make things very difficult for people, and you can get to the heart of problems. And so the opportunities for Christians are, you can do a course like I did, you can become a school governor. You never underestimate how influential a school, education is on a child's life and their upbringing. And by being a school governor, you can make sure that some of the godly principles that we follow actually make it into the school, for exactly what you were saying before. You can become a local councillor and serve your local area. You can aspire to be an MP. There are loads and loads of stories of people who think, oh, well, Christians are never going to make it into Parliament. There are lots of stories that prove otherwise. God is bigger than anything we can ever imagine, and he can take the most unlikely person, put them into Parliament, and make amazing changes in whatever sphere they're actually in. So I would say, just like Christians in politics do, get involved, show up. Don't stand from the side shouting in. It's not half as effective as going in, getting involved, and being salt and light where you are. So that's what I would encourage people to do, and that includes going on a programme like this when you're very terrified.
Exactly. Brian, let's look at the aspect of people making policies in Parliament, when it's the wrong people having the wrong attributes, trying to make policies to influence the whole nation and generations yet to come.
Oh, well, certainly. I mean, any government can take any laws off the statute book when they come in, but if they say we want to take something off, it causes a lot more attention than governments looking to put things on the statute book. It's say the right or wrong people. In a democracy, the right person is who the majority vote for, because they're the people that people wanted in power. how the result of them being in power is where you say whether they've done the right or the wrong thing. And after they've done the wrong thing, it's too late to backtrack. How do we get the right people in? As Rowena was saying, that the churches used to be a far greater, more powerful network than they are now. Henry VIII disenfranchised the Catholic Church, and that brought about there being the insurgence of the Church of England and so on and so forth. But with few people attending church, that network's not as strong nationally. But within the church, it is extremely strong, and we have lots of good people that we could put forward and vote. And it's if you want something to happen, and you pray on it, it will happen. But the thing is, whether, as you were saying, Rowena, whether people believe there will be Christians in Parliament or not, may determine whether we do get any. We need to think positively about what we can do in politics, in daily life. Push it forward and get someone on the benches and see what influence they can have. Maybe just having one person in there will spread the message, and having a Christian who is in Parliament receiving column inches and so on and so forth will get Christianity more in the public mind, as opposed to Muslims. We hear about people getting to Parliament who have come through a religion, and Sajid Javid, who's now on the Conservative front bench. But Ian Duncan Smith was always a strong Christian, but we hear less about that compared to Sajid Javid's other ethnicity. And that's a problem. Christians need to be first talked about by making themselves heard first.
Rowena, how can we encourage parents to let their children get involved in politics early enough, especially Christian parents? That's one other thing, when the children are not brought up right, to think that, oh, that's something that they can go into, they wouldn't think of it at all.
I think politics in itself, what puts people off going into politics is the perception that it's very dark, and all the expenses scandal that we heard of.
And really what the media portrays.
Yes, exactly. And actually the reality was, and that's what I thought, you know, I've worked for an advertising agency, worked in the media for a long time, and that's what I believed. But actually once I got involved with Christians in politics, I realised that wasn't. There's over 600 people in Parliament who are Christian, working within the government in some form or another, whether it's an MP or whether they're working, supporting MPs to do their job. And so I would say that more Christians becoming school governors, getting involved. There are amazing organisations out there who are doing youth work and advocacy and helping our youngsters today to become more engaged. But I think we do that by leading by example as well. So people like me standing up and saying, do you know what, I don't know what I'm doing, but God's calling me into this, so I'm going to give it a go and see how I go. That will influence my children to think, actually, just stand up. If you want to make a difference, just stand up. So I think actually by us encouraging our children, having more, you know, Christian. My daughter went to a Christian school, so it's by, you know, us going in there and going, let's do a seminar on politics and show how relevant it is and how you're already doing it on social media. My children understand more about social media than I do, so actually let's use that to help them get engaged with things they feel passionate about. I think what Brian was saying about, I think what's really indicative of the way the world is going at the moment is the BBC employing a Muslim as in charge of their religious affairs, yes. Which is an interesting choice for the British Broadcasting Company.
Which has inherently been Christian.
Exactly. We are in a Christian society, and as Christians we are open-hearted to anyone who comes into our land, and we should care for them and love them. That's what we're told to do. It's a biblical mandate for all of us. And I think we should do more of that. That, I still find, I think is a separate issue and is an interesting choice, because it's going to shape the media again is going to shape the religious landscape.
Well, viewers, we are talking about the role of the media in politics. If you've got any questions, you can send emails to talkingpolitics@loveworldtv.co.uk. If you want to be heard, stand up and speak up. That's the message here. Thank you, Rowena. Let's go to the Iran nuclear deal. Britain is right to work towards good relations with Iran, but should tread carefully and cautiously. That was said by the Foreign Secretary Philip Hammond ahead of talks with President Hassan Rouhani in Tehran. Also, United States Republican presidential candidate Mike Huckabee on Wednesday condemned the Iran nuclear deal during a visit to Israel.
To say backtrack, I would simply, from the very beginning of my presidency, make it very clear that this deal is an unacceptable deal for a peaceful future, not just for the United States or Israel, but for really all the world. This does not accomplish anything other than empowering a rogue nation, a nation that has shown consistently its intention to wipe other nations, including America, right off of the map. And it would be an extraordinary amount of money, especially if a government had no honorable intentions of spending it in a way that actually helped people who are poor or who are sick or who are hungry, but rather whose first major action was to purchase new weapon systems and delivery systems from the Russian government. This again is just a reminder that this is not a regime whose intentions are to become a partner to peace. This is a regime whose intentions have for 36 years to be a force of terror in the Middle East and throughout the world.
Well, Mike Huckabee is not the only senator to oppose the deal. Democratic Senator Robert Menendez also denounced the Iran nuclear deal, the second senior lawmaker from President Barack Obama's own party to do so.
In essence, we thought the agreement would be rollback for rollback. You roll back your infrastructure, and we'll roll back our sanctions. And at the end of the day, what we appear to have is a rollback of sanctions, and Iran only limiting its capability, but not dismantling or rolling it back. So what do we get? We get an alarm bell should they decide to violate their commitments, and a system for inspections to verify their compliances. That, in my view, is a far cry from significant dismantling. We should authorize now the means for Israel to address the Iranian threat on their own in the event that Iran accelerates its program, and to counter Iranian perceptions that our own threat to use force is not credible. And we should make it absolutely clear that we want a deal, but we want the right deal, and that a deal that does nothing more than delay the inevitable isn't a deal we are willing to make.
Brian, let's look at this deal. Is this the right deal? That's the issue here. The point the senior lawmakers who have opposed this deal are saying is this: the plan was to roll back the sanctions, and at the same time, Iran rolls back its infrastructure. But Iran hasn't rolled back any of its infrastructure, and the sanctions are being rolled back.
Yes, I think, Wilma, it was a case of who takes the first step. Both sides have been opposing each other for 30 years, since the 79 revolution, which ousted the Shah and brought in the Ayatollahs. And there's been tension between the two countries and across the region for a number of decades. And the case, well, we'll help you out if you go first. No, you go first, you go first. And it had been stalled for a number of years. This new negotiation with a new treaty, which would hopefully intended to roll back Iran's nuclear threat by, as you say, dismantling the infrastructure there. In return, America and the World Trade Organizations and the international bodies would roll back their sanctions. I think Iran wanted a bit of give first, because the country's been under pressure for a long, long time, and I think America just had to give them a bit first. We'll see what is reflected with Iran's restraints and rolling back of their nuclear program.
But the problem with Iran is that Iran has come out long ago to say Israel shouldn't be on the map of the world. So rolling back the sanctions without rolling back any of its infrastructure to lots of people, Iran is a threat, not just to Israel, but to the whole world. That's the way it's seen now.
It is. I'm seeing Mick Huckabee there. I'm a Republican senator, British stereotyping I was talking about earlier. A lot of their suspicions, paranoias, understandings seem to again date back a couple of decades or so. None of these people seem to have a fresh view on it, because if they were developing, they were they was in politics or building, they were being educated, reading the books and press at the time when the Iranian Revolution happened. I still think there's a lot of beliefs, paranoias and understandings about Iran from that time. I hope that I'm right, because is this the right deal? I think anything which lowers the nuclear threat is a good deal. Does Israel believe that? Because Israel's got nuclear weapons that it insists is hidden from anyone else knowing about. Israel has is walking a tightrope, because Israel can't really say anything about Iran's nuclear weapons when Israel's being very secretive about its own.
The point here is this. For Iran, who has said Israel should not be on the map of the world, how is this a threat to Israel? What should Israel do?
I think Israel should continue to do what it's been doing for decades, which is make sure it's got the infrastructure and the weapons to defend itself as and when needed, because things in that region are going to change with Iran's growth in influence and the Saudis lessening the influence with the oil prices and so on and so forth going around. So Iran's going to become more influential in the Persian Gulf, and Israel is right to feel slightly nervous about that situation. But is it really much, much worse than Saudi being strong? Because the Saudi regime and the religious faith in that country is very strong, and they're very anti-Israel too. So which is worse? I'm not sure I know which. So Israel, as I say, needs to, what it's been doing for the last 30 years is it's dug its heels in, it's made sure it's got the weapons, got the defences and so on and so forth to make sure it can be safe and defend itself. I think Israel needs to carry on doing that, Wilma.
Thank you, Brian. Let's go to the migrant crisis in Europe now. More than 1,000 migrants crossed into Serbia from Macedonia earlier Monday. And not only that, they followed the more than 5,000 people who crossed into Serbia on Sunday near the village of Mirachovac in Macedonia. Macedonia declared a state of emergency on Thursday and has sealed its southern frontier to migrants, pouring in at a rate of 2,000 per day. That's quite a huge number, 2,000 per day.
150,000 so far this year, Wilma. It's a massive number. And Macedonia and Serbia, when the migrants were queuing at their border, got slightly violent. They opened the doors, said, right, you're not staying in our countries. Best thing you can do is come through as quickly as possible and get to Europe, which is where you want to go. So again, naming those two countries, Greece isn't helping in this either, because the sea crossing between Greece and Turkey is very small compared to crossing the Mediterranean from North Africa. It needs a European-wide solution, and Europe has been so non-committal on any of this. They're blaming individual countries. You opened your borders, you didn't do this, you didn't do this. But it's Europe they want to get to, so it's Europe that has to put the funds forward.
And it seems Cali is likely to be the last bus stop here.
Yes. That's the last water they cross is the English Channel, and that's saved us from many, many things, from the Middle Ages to the present day, the World War II. And it's been a welcome breakwater, but as you say, Wilma, the Calais is going to be the last bus stop.
Greece needs to be helped here, because Alexis Tsipras, anyway, has resigned, has called in fresh elections. He's not a stable government right now. What can be done to help these migrants in Greece?
What can we do to help the migrants in Greece? Greece should have plans, if not the money, to do something for incoming migrants. When been a long time the migrants have been coming to Greece from abroad, they must have something on paper, some process.
Greece is literally broke.
They must have plans, if not the money, and Europe's got the money. So there must be some agreement they can come to get that funded. What can we do with Greece? It's a difficult territory to defend, Wilma. There's so many islands and archipelagos and so on and so forth, and it's a very short crossing, a relatively shallow crossing. And that's our Achilles heel for migrants. It really is, because they don't have to cross that much. All of the way from Afghanistan, Pakistan, they can come to Turkey, from Iraq and other places that are facing challenges at the moment. North Africa, again, they walk up through the Sahel, through Egypt and up, and they can be in Turkey. And it's an easy crossing. What can we do to Greece? Give them things, install completely.
What do you think, Rowena?
Well, I absolutely think, These people, we were blessed enough to be born here,
Yes.
where if you work hard, you can provide for your family. Not everybody is blessed to be born in a place like that, and I think we are a wealthy nation. Europe is a wealthy place. America is a wealthy place. There are plenty of wealthy, but these are people who have nothing often. They're fleeing war, they're fleeing just desperate situations. And actually, I just think as Christians, another time for us to stand up. We can stand up and love people. Another biblical mandate that we're called to do is to help people. And it's actually, some of the photography that we've seen, the media's actually done a lot of good, because it's making us not be able to look away. It's making us as humans go, actually it might not be on our doorstep, but the scenes at Calais are ridiculous. We are a wealthy country. We can afford to help people. We can afford to love people and care for them in their desperate pain. As look at Greece, it has no money, they are still caring for people. People are going down, feeding them, clothing them, putting blankets on them. That's what we should do as humans. We should, instead of this is another reason why Christians should be in government, because then you can make decisions about the widows and the orphans and people who are in desperate situations, who aren't as blessed as we are. And actually, I think we should be saying, what more should we be doing? What more should we be doing? We shouldn't be talking about it. We should be getting up, getting on our feet and doing some stuff. And as Christians, there's millions of us. They might have you believe otherwise, but there's millions of us. We can do more to help these people.
Which means we should have action plans on how to actually help these people, resettle them, but not just talk about sending them back to Syria and Iraq, where there are beheadings going on.
Well, if you look at organisations like Tear Fund, World Vision, their whole way that they're set up is to go into countries and leave the countries and the people more stable, so that so long term they can have sustainable care, health, basic things like water and food that we take for granted. These are things that organisations like I've just mentioned, their whole plan is to go in and not just drop food anymore, it's to go in and actually make countries sustainable long term. And so that all these organisations are doing work behind the scenes. It just doesn't get mentioned again for the same reasons. You'll hear about maybe the Red Cross, or you'll maybe hear about other humanitarian organisations that are all doing, brilliant work as well. But you very rarely hear about some of the wonderful, Christian humanitarian organisations doing
Yes,
their
you want
work.
to say something,
I was
Brian?
going to say, it's very interesting hearing you say that, Rowena, because looking at Christians in politics as well, it all comes together at a nice point, because Theresa May passed the comment that what we should do with migrants is when they get here, fly them home. Not redevelop the countries we're sending them back to, not stem the migrants coming in, just when they get here, send them home.
We'll stop on that point. Thank you so much, Brian. Thank you so much,
Thank
Rowena,
you.
for coming on the program. Thank you. Well, viewers, this is Talking Politics, and today we've been looking at the role of media in politics, Iran's nuclear deal. Is it the right deal, and the migrants in Europe? If you have any questions, you can send emails to talkingpolitics@loveworldtv.co.uk. In the meantime, enjoy the rest of our programs.